Hello all, by the looks of things we've just finished another season now, haven't we? So as spring draws to a close and summer inches its way into our peripherals, it is time for me to review a couple of the shows I've been watching over the last few months. Without any further ado, let's get chatting about a little 13-episode sci-fi series known as Sci-Fi no Gargantia, or Gargantia on the Verdurous planet. It aired during the spring season of 2013, was produced by the studio Production IG, written by the rather incredible Geno Ibuchi, and directed by Kazuya Murata. This story takes place in a distant post-apocalyptic future where humanity live in space and have been locked in an ongoing war with an alien species known as the Hideas. The Galactic Alliance survive in this war through a very strict military regime, and there's a lot of hyper super crazy mega technology going on all over the place. We begin the first episode in the cockpit of a young lieutenant known as Ledo. Yup, that is his entire name. After a cheeky 10 minutes of very colourful space combat with the Hideas, Ledo goofs and gets sucked through a wormhole or some other kind of space donut thing, and he ends up in a place both you and I are at least somewhat familiar with. That's right, he lands on Earth, which was thought to be a barren wasteland by the Galactic Alliance, but it's actually a rather lovely place still, even if it is covered entirely in water at this stage in history. After being fished out of the sea by some locals, he ends up on Gargantia, which is essentially a large fleet of ships and industrial looking floaty things all stuck together into a massive society. Obviously everyone's surprised to find this hunk of hyper technology in the ocean, but once Ledo finally gets out of his robro to survey the new environment, the folk of Gargantia get all hostile and chase him about a bit. And eventually, after being cornered and his bot chamber has deciphered their language, he's all like, "Put your gats down lads, we mean you no harm." And well, some neutral ground is established. This soon develops into a storyline revolving around this seemingly alien outsider Ledo having to try to adjust and adapt into a world so incredibly different to what he was used to in the Galactic Alliance. And though he does face a hefty number of important issues before the series is through, at its core this is essentially what Gargantia is about. It's a classic castaway story, but with a really interesting setting and history that offers up a huge range of possibilities as to what direction it could end up going. The backbone of Ledo's ideals and their effect on the narrative allowed his role to really shine, and each contradiction and dilemma he had to face was often mirrored in the condition and stability of Gargantia itself. So this allowed his role as a protagonist to brilliantly guide the flow of the narrative in a way I've seen very few other shows really do. This approach had this thing feel really damn solid and consistent in its execution, and so even with a span of light-hearted slice of life episodes taking place in the middle of the series, it always came across as though it were moving forwards. In other words, it was paced immaculately and was all around from start to finish, an incredibly well-rounded and just, you know, good show. But unfortunately for me, that's pretty much all it was. The consistency and perfect structure almost feels like it was there because this thing refused to take any risks in the story it was telling. In this way, it felt like they were almost taking an anime by numbers approach, as what they were doing was good, it just didn't have any real impact taking it beyond that for me. The possibilities and directions they could have gone with the setting they'd established were so expansive, but you're able to telegraph many plot points they were going to use well in advance because of how by the book this thing felt. And even in times where they built up twists and threw gritty and important developments your way, it was certainly unpredictable, but it was almost entirely lacking in the needed impact because there was no urgency to it. And it's a damn shame, honestly, because if this thing had something extra to push it beyond simply good, consistent and well made, it could have been something absolutely excellent. Though sadly it wasn't. It ticked all the boxes for what makes a great anime, but it did so in a really bland shade of ink. Actually, there was also one thing I thought was proper stupid. In one of the early episodes, some pirate queen lady shows up and she looks like this, which I thought in itself was completely silly and out of place. But what was absolutely ridiculous is that she's in charge of some massive group of feral and animalistic pirate blokes who were during the episode before this one essentially pillaging and groping female prisoners. I don't think this breast factory on legs is going to be able to keep their libidos under control no matter how strong her robotic lobster is famed to be. But I guess this was just how they decided to introduce that character, and she's actually used pretty well when she shows up later in the series. And her initial introduction was as a whole pretty much the only point in the series where I deemed any character on the screen to be poorly represented. Everyone else had a great role to fill, and all the residents of Gargantia and beyond who received any sort of recognition and screen time were all around very well written and as solid as the series was. Though I do still feel about them the same way I do feel about the rest of it. They were very well written and very well utilised, but no boundaries were broken whatsoever. Of course that doesn't mean they were bad, like at all, just that they weren't going on any most badass, best, coolest characters of all time list of excellence desu. What they were, they did their job, and Ledo is the most excellent example of this. He's a very strong and straight-edge military guy who at the start of the series has only one thing on his mind: killing aliens, killing aliens, killing aliens, killing aliens, killing aliens. But once he falls into this new surrounding, he changes with each new thing happening around him to probe his ideals and open his eyes to stuff beyond killing aliens. So like, you know, eating meat cooked off of a robot and watching girls dance around. What a lad. This dude showed immense willpower and growth at various points in the series, and as I said, reflected the state of the world around him at all times. He was a great character, and a well-designed one at that. It's also worth noting how well the relationship between him and his trusty machine caliber chamber was shown too. It wasn't really a case of master and weapon, they felt like partners, and Chamber had just the right amount of character to him for him to feel alive, but it still remained clear that he was a piece of machinery.
私はチェンバーです。よろしくお願いします。
Nice to meet you too, Chamber. The major main relationship this show pushes to the viewer, though, is the one between Leto and the main heroine, Amy. It had a very interesting dynamic to it in that it was very clear that the idea of romance and fornication between two members of opposite sexes for the purposes of having a jolly good time are both concepts completely beyond Leto, but there was still something lingering there beyond friendship. Amy was the driving force that triggers Leto's changes throughout the series and was what made him what he was, but as a character in her own right, she was pretty decent, but nothing all that special. She's one of your lively, positive lumps of bubbly enthusiasm. She was very naive and idealistic, but also very responsible and aware of the world around her. I enjoyed her presence on the screen in general, and what she brought to the story was nothing if not essential, so I can't knock her for that. This kind of overly happy and energetic individual is by far the most effective choice of heroine to trigger change in a character like Leto, and I'm sure that's precisely why she was designed that way. I would like to talk about a few more characters, but that's not really necessary, to be honest. All you need to know is that the cast as a whole were very well written. There were some very interesting relationships and developments involving members of the crew, and I really did enjoy experiencing the lives of those I was watching. And well, there were some pretty interesting designs in there too, and a great contrast was used between the design of those from the Galactic Alliance and those who reside on Earth. Leto and Chamber had a very fitting futuristic sci-fi look to them, and those on Gargantia were very rural and rustic, but also really colourful, matching the almost utopian feeling of their society. I really dug the design of the machine calibers in general as well, actually, as they look completely different to any mecha I've seen before. They're kind of baby-like and bulbous, but really interesting inside and out, and I always appreciate a good innovative mecha design. And the design of Gargantia itself was absolutely gorgeous. The overly industrial and rusted out aesthetic of the fleet had it feel like it really had been lived in and used by a huge number of people for a very long time. It was really vibrant and certainly rather pretty to look at, and that's basically how the show felt in general. It was incredibly colourful and very nicely animated, even if there were moments where some of the characters looked all iffy and derptacular. There's one thing I want to highlight about this show as I move into the audio here that I thought was incredibly professional and exceptionally well done. So in the first couple of episodes, Leto and Chamber are speaking a completely different language to the residents of Gargantia, but of course they aren't literally, as everyone is speaking Japanese, but what this show does to express that is have the other party speak gobbledygook when you're watching it from whichever perspective. So Amy will be talking to Leto in nonsense, then Leto will talk to Chamber in Japanese and be all like, yo, what's she saying, dog? And then he'll translate to Leto. And switching back to Amy's perspective, you'll hear them talking, but in a noticeably different flavour of gobbledygook. It may not sound like much from how I've described it, but I thought it was incredible, especially when it came to Leto learning to speak the language of Gargantia and hearing him talk Japanese like he's never spoken the language before. And what more is there to say, really? The audio was pretty much excellent overall. It had a rich and varied assortment of fitting background music and enough well-recorded sound effects to have this thing feel as alive as the community it was telling you a story about. It's even got a rodent that sounds like Togepi. So take that however you like. I might have made it sound like I didn't enjoy this with how I was pegging it as being bland and all that, but that really wasn't the case. It was exceptionally well made. I was just disappointed because it had the potential to be so much more. I mean, this is Gen Urobuchi's work we're talking about. That guy's no slouch. One thing I think people need to be aware of when diving into this show though is that it's not at all mecha orientated like I've heard many people say about it for some reason. Mecha battles do show up eclectically, but that's not this thing's MO. It's a castaway story that deals with social issues, not something like Valve Rave that spent 12 episodes going, fire laser, that way! All in all, this enjoyable apple shall be receiving a solid 70%, and if you're looking to pick up something from the spring season, this one should not be missed. And if you do wish to check it out, head on over to Crunchyroll and I'm sure you'll have a whale squid of a time. Link down there. So, have you seen this show? If so, what did you think of it? And as always, like, subscribe, and feel free to drop me a recommendation of what you want me to review next. One more from the spring season to go before we return to regularly scheduled programming, so until then, see you next week. Blop zombie and people about. What the bloody hell is he on about? Flieger blop zombie people dopa. What Chamber? What the balls is this guy on about?
He says he wants a cup of tea.
Oh, why didn't you say so? I'll go pop the kettle on.